Paul McGuire. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. One of the things that makes the United States of America different than most other nations is the fact that our founding fathers, many of them who had a biblical or a Christian worldview, created the documents that govern our land or are supposed to govern our land, such as the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And in the Bill of Rights, we have such rights as freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of the press. Now, those freedoms, just those three alone, they interact with one another. They're synergistic. Freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and freedom of speech go hand in hand. Because in evangelism, you use the press or you use media quite often. And freedom of the press means that no government agency shall restrain the right of the people to publish whatever their viewpoint is through mass communications or press. Now, the news story that's being circulated, primarily being driven by the Washington Post and others, is that Russian propaganda influenced the election, and it is Russian propaganda that is driving the majority of the non-mainstream media organizations, and specifically all kinds of websites that are not, quote, mainstream media, but they're independent in terms of what they say, who owns them, etc., etc. And these alternative websites, blog sites, Facebooks, social media, and so on, they're the ones that release information that is censored by the mainstream media. And that's why there are so many Americans that have been gravitating towards these sites for the last, since the internet began to really take off. Countless numbers of Americans have been gravitating to websites and blog sites and social media that gives you more information and in-depth information than the mainstream media, which is controlled by just 6 corporations, which are controlled by the globalist elite. Now, the Washington Post, which is probably the flagship of one of the flagships of the mainstream media, is continuing to print these. I mean, they're really, in my opinion, ridiculous and absurd stories. I mean, they don't even really deserve to be talked about, because the assertions are so ridiculous, they're so absurd that, if you've been listening to me do these programs, I've talked about the lack of journalistic integrity and the lack of journalistic standards, which used to exist a decade or so ago. To whatever degree, there used to be some remnant of a journalistic standard and journalistic integrity. Now that's gone. It's completely out the window. So we have organizations like the Washington Post. I mean, this is just so ridiculous, with no proof. It's just an in-your-face. You know what it does is it pulls. I was never a fan of the Washington Post to begin with. In fact, I try to read it not read it as often as I can, because it's so transparently, in my opinion, an instrument of propaganda. But the Washington Post published an article which promotes a list of websites, and some of the websites you're going to recognize the names. And these people who run the websites and write the websites, etc., are, according to the Washington Post, and this is just how ridiculous it is, are Russian propaganda peddlers. So in other words, the accusation is that they are either spreading fake news. Now remember, fake news There's the mainstream media's definition of fake news, which is now, they keep changing it. So fake news is now, I feel like laughing, it's just so absolutely crazy. Fake news is the news that you see on all these non-mainstream media websites. And fake news is now really, according to the Washington Post and other organizations, they're outlets for Russian propaganda, either deliberately, they're Russian agents. Now, you've got to really start laughing your head off there. It's just so stupid. The whole thing is so stupid. But the problem is there's a huge percentage of the population that will buy it hook, line, and sinker because they are equally, and I'm stupid. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. It reminds me of this movie a long, long time ago. The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. And it was back in the time when the Cold War was going on. So anyway, the Washington Post asserts, claims, I don't know what word to use, that Russian propaganda spread fake news during the election and influenced the election. Now, their source for this is what really is the most absurd thing of all. Their source for this is this website, Prop or Not. And on the Prop or Not website, there's no names associated with the website. There's no groups associated with the website. So the Washington Post supposedly adheres to journalistic integrity. And then they publish as fact the wild claims of a website that they know nothing about or claim to know nothing about. And this website has no names attached to it, no groups funding it attached to it. It's just a website with not one single name, and no group, no accountability. I mean, it could have been done by a 15-year-old, in Kansas. And the Washington Post uses this as their information piece to make this absolutely crazy and wild assertion. I mean, this puts the Washington Post in the category of just like the lowest of lowest rag sheets, the kind of newspapers we used to find on the subway. People would read and throw on the subway floors, litter the subway stations and the subways. It's just total garbage. And yet they list some websites that you are familiar with, including Drudge Report, the biggest website there is according to the Washington Post and other liberal news media outlets. The Drudge Report is an agent of Russian propaganda, or is unknowingly spreading Russian propaganda, according to Prop or Not. That's the Washington Post's source. This fictitious website with that comes out of nowhere, with nobody's name behind it at this point. This is like nuts for a mainstream news organization to publish this as if it was serious. And I guarantee the media is going to go crazy with this, and they'll discuss it as if it was serious. Now, remember, fake news is this term that was developed. They say fake news is news that is made up, has no facts, and that's what they claim, like the Washington Post and the other mainstream media claim that fake news is all over the internet, and it's made up, and it has no legitimate sources, et cetera, which, by the way, is precisely what the Washington Post is guilty of in quoting as its source, Prop or Not. Now, what it really is fake news is not what they say it is. Fake news is any news that disagrees with the official position and beliefs of the mainstream media, like CNN and the Washington Post and on and on and on. So anybody who disagrees with the mainstream media on anything is now a part of a conspiracy. They are either agents of Russian propaganda or unknowingly agents of Russian propaganda. And many of you probably remember going back during the, not during this past election cycle, but going back to the many years ago, the earlier Clinton election cycle. The Clintons used this term, the vast right-wing conspiracy, and the media repeated it constantly. The vast right-wing conspiracy. So there was a vast right-wing conspiracy out to get the Clintons and the mainstream media. I mean, this was huge. Now, here we are, many years later, and they are using the exact same strategy, except they no longer call it the vast right-wing conspiracy. It is now a Russian propaganda conspiracy where Russian agents are secretly publishing some of these blog sites and news stories, or people are unknowingly publishing Russian propaganda. I mean, it's complete and total nonsense and baloney. But you will see the media talk about it as if it was serious, and that's how degraded our media has become. The mainstream media, controlled by 6 corporations, they have degraded themselves. They are so biased. They lie constantly. They distort the information constantly. They don't even have a shred of integrity, the vast majority of them, with very few exceptions. And all this is designed, at least at this point, to challenge Donald Trump's the legitimacy of his presidency. And it's all connected to another part of the plan, which is to force a recount. And the concern is not to prove, and I hope you're listening to me carefully, that the game plan here is not to use the recount to prove that Hillary won or Trump won. Well, Trump already did win. But that's not the real game plan. So a lot of people think, oh, the purpose of the recount is to find flaws in the original count, and maybe we'll see if Hillary won the presidency. That's not the real purpose of it. That's part of the smoke and mirrors show. The real agenda is deeper than that. The real agenda is that they're not concerned with the actual numbers of who won the election, because the Hillary people already know that, the recount will almost inevitably reveal that Trump won the election. And then you have Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, who mysteriously, why would a candidate like Jill Stein demand a recount when she only got about 1% of the votes? She could recount till doomsday and she wouldn't win the election. She can't possibly win the election. She could recount for eternity and she won't win the election. So why is she doing it? Well, she raised $7 million. Maybe that's why she's doing it. And who gave her the $7 million? So the real purpose of this recount is the expectation that the states that are going to be recounted will not meet their time deadlines in order to complete the recount. In other words, they have a certain deadline by which they must finish the recount. Now, there's a rule which says this, and this is what I want you to listen carefully to, and I'll quote my source, but this is the real agenda behind this mysterious push for recounts. According to the American Thinker, November 27th, 2016, in an article entitled "The Democrats' Real Strategy in Launching Recounts" by Richard Baker, the author asserts the recounts, if done by hand, which can be demanded, may take longer than the last day for completing the official counts in a state and directing electoral college voters. If all 3 states miss the deadline, then Trump is at 260, Hillary is at 232, and no one hits 270. So what that means is it's not that the election recount is officially completed with new results that will be the challenge. It's the fact that the states, if the states miss the deadline, it changes the numbers. And then it goes to the Congress, where the House votes 1 vote per state, elects Trump. And then the Senate elects Pence. So what can happen here, because this happened once with John Quincy Adams. So if it goes to the U.S. House and Senate, the result is the same as the result from the Electoral College without the recounts. Why do it? The author says. The answer is to make Trump seem even more illegitimate, that he did not win the popular vote. He lost by over 2.1 million. He did not win the Electoral College vote, simply because of the way this vote is conducted. So what it does is it makes Trump's winning, claims of winning, well, not claims of winning, he won, illegitimate. So anything can happen after that, okay? And because by making it illegitimate, think of all the riots that are going on now. You add this to it, you increase the riots, and what you have here is a siege to take them out. That's what it's all about. Now, the Russian propaganda thing is part of this, but it's actually far more sinister than that. Because the cornerstone of freedom of religion, the right to believe your faith, the right to teach the Bible, the right to evangelize, the right to publish, promote, speak on Christianity and the Bible, all those rights are connected, as I said before, to the rights such as freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press. When you allow the mainstream media, which is controlled by a globalist elite, and by the way, that should not even be happening anyway, because if the government was doing its job, that would be illegal, because you have foreign influences controlling American news. That very action corrupts the freedom of the press. But you have, for example, Saudi Arabia owning huge chunks of American media outlets, and China buying up all kinds of feature film and Hollywood companies and studios, and on the list goes. So when you have that, you have foreign influence over our media, which means it's corrupted. Suddenly you find no movies that show, let's say, the dark side of ISIS, and suddenly you have no movies that show that China could be potentially a threat to America, and you now have a complete reversal being projected in the news media and the film industry. So that in itself is a threat, and yet it's being allowed by our government, which it should not be, because if the government was adhering to the Constitution, they would never have allowed it to begin with. But now you take it up a step. So you have this globalist elite, and when we say globalist elite, we're talking about the world's wealthiest people, both in America and outside of America. So the reality is you have some of the most wealthiest people and families in the world outside of America controlling the media through corporations. 6 corporations that control the media. That's not, right there, that's not freedom of the press. It's been hampered. That's why the media, for the most part, they all cover the exact same stories, almost the exact same way, with minor differences, with few exceptions. And the media has this same bias, the same philosophy, the same belief system, the same hidden agenda in America. They march like one army, controlled by the globalist elite. And then you have, promoting this, promoting that, and much of it involves the promotion of things that are against the Bible and the promotion of things that the Bible is against. And the media is in lockstep in doing that, along with the film and music industry. So now you turn it up a notch and you create this absolutely fictitious idea that the Russians are controlling our social media. The Russians are controlling all the media, the alternative media. And they're not to be trusted because, the Russians are controlling them. Now, you have to ask yourself the question, why would they choose such an outrageous story as the Russians are controlling the alternative media? And that Russian propaganda, tampered with the election. And during the election, they said Russia is behind the WikiLeaks dumps, which was not true. By the way, Julian Assange of WikiLeaks has been missing ever since after the election. What happened to him? He's gone. Nobody knows where he is. So what happened to Julian Assange? Was he killed? Was he assassinated? Did he go voluntarily into hiding? Nobody would know that he would go voluntarily into hiding because he legally had to be where he was. Legally, he was not allowed to leave, and there were guards in the place and outside of the place. So what happened to Julian Assange? Did they kill him? People are killed inside the United States for telling the truth. Wake up and smell the coffee. And people are killed outside the United States of America for telling the truth. Did somebody kill him? Obviously, the Russians were not behind the WikiLeaks dumps. Because if they were, why would you bother to kill Julian Assange? If indeed he's dead. I pray that he's alive. But he is missing. And he's been missing since the election. Think about that. Pray for him as an individual. Very strange. Don't turn a blind eye. Don't pretend you didn't see it. You just heard it now, so now you're accountable. This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. We're going to get back into more about fake news and how fake news is an eminent threat to religious freedom. There is a psychological principle behind all of this that has been used numerous times in history. And Adolf Hitler called it the big lie. And his propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, also referred to it as the big lie. And we'll get into all those psychological dynamics as we continue. In my books, the first book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, I deal with these kinds of things in depth. And in my book, Mass Awakening, I deal with these things in depth, and also I deal in depth with propaganda, scientific mind control, Adolf Hitler's propaganda principle he called the big lie, and how the big lie is being used now. I deal with this in my latest book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, 2016-2017. And really, you need to get these books, because A Prophecy of the Future of America, 2016-2017 explains what is happening, why it's happening, and why the years 2016 and the year 2017 are critically important. And you have to understand it in order to be an effective person and Christian and individual. You have to understand what's really going on. If you have a superficial understanding of what's going on, you will just be part of that clueless mass of dumbed down Americans, and tragically, the most tragic of all, that clueless mass of a disturbingly large percentage of evangelical Christians. And that's why they're powerless, for the most part. Not all. I'm talking about 74% of evangelical Christians. And by the way, that's the same percentage of evangelical Christians who don't read or teach Bible prophecy in their churches. 74%. The dumbed down ones. Okay, so the purpose of this, many of you don't remember, and I don't really remember because I was too young, but I read about it, heard about it a lot. The McCarthy hearings of Joseph McCarthy. And there were also, in conjunction with that, were the House of Un-American Activities. And McCarthy, though, was known as the most famous because he opened up all kinds of investigations into Americans, some of them that were very influential in Hollywood and other places. And he is portrayed by the leftist media as this bigot, insane censor, because he believed that America was infiltrated by communists, and we were eventually going to be taken down internally by the communists unless they were routed out. So Joseph McCarthy used his power as senator to hold hearings and investigations to uproot the communists that had infiltrated our nation. And the liberal media at the time laughed at him and has mocked him ever since. Just every other year there's some movie or television special replaying the whole Senator Joseph McCarthy, anti-communist thing, and the whole idea is to make him a laughing stock. But as certain authors have discovered, and many researchers discovered, despite the fact that he was made fun of, despite the fact that the guy made a lot of mistakes and some excesses, despite all that, many authors and experts believe that Joseph McCarthy was spot on as to what was happening. And that's why he was demonized in the press. So it turned out that Joseph McCarthy's so-called witch hunt against communists was not unfounded, because it was based on truth. It doesn't mean everything he did was based on truth, but a large part of it. But now we have this same attack mode, of all places, coming from the Washington Post. And I'm reading from an article in the Intercept by Glenn Greenwald, who has worked with Julian Assange. And the only reason I chose this article was on the front page of the Drudge Report, which is also being accused of being, Matt Drudge is accused of being a communist agent. You hear how ridiculous this sounds? But the problem is the millennials demonstrating in front of Trump Tower, the Washington Post, CNN, and so many other liberal media outlets will run with this as if it's true. So Glenn Greenwald, who, despite whatever his flaws, the guy appears to be at least a real journalist, unlike the frauds we have. I mean, they're total frauds on some of these cable news networks and these large publications. They're total frauds with the IQs of turnips. Okay, the headline for Greenwald's story is Washington Post disgracefully promotes a McCarthyite blacklist from a new, hidden, and very shady group, which brings up the fact that McCarthy did create a blacklist of suspected communists. But this liberal media, along with the Washington Post, is now created a blacklist out of thin air with absolutely no facts to back it up. None. Zero. And I remember during the debates when the moderator in the debate between Trump and Hillary conspicuously decided to defend Hillary. And he was lauded as a hero for how objective he was. I didn't find him that objective. He was more objective as a moderator than the others. That's true. But that's not saying much. So this moderator, in my opinion, Chris Wallace of Fox News, bailed out Hillary Clinton when things got tough because she asserted something about how the Russians were involved in releasing the emails against her. And Trump said that was total nonsense. And then Chris Wallace jumped in to defend her. That's not a moderator. A moderator doesn't jump in to defend and then call it fact check. Fact checked is like, it's baloney because it's all based on what facts you decide to check. So Chris Wallace hammers at Trump during the debate. Well, he said something like, 17 or 18 intelligence agencies, blah, 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 or agents believe that the Russians have invaded the emails. Well, that was a partial truth, which is not the same as the truth. Yeah, there probably were 17 or 18, or maybe more. The ones that are politically biased and have an agenda. But the overwhelming majority, what he failed to say, is that the overwhelming majority of intelligence agents and agencies did not believe that the Russians were involved. Very biased, but helped to build the Clintonian narrative that the Russians are coming. Okay, so Glenn Greenwald talks about the Washington Post. And again, this new blacklist, and they list a whole bunch of websites, is based on nothing, though. You see, when McCarthy had his hearings in a blacklist, they did tons of research on people and groups. Doesn't mean they were right all the time. They accused some people who were innocent. Okay? He did some bad things. I'm not saying he didn't. But a lot of times he got it right. But at least he had facts and substance. Some which did not stand the test of scrutiny, and some which did. The Washington Post has no facts. It has zero facts to make these outrageous. To get out there and use your enormous power as the Washington Post and to accuse people like Matt Drudge and many other websites that you would know of being communist agents, Russian agents, or echoing Russian propaganda without knowing it is an outrageous accusation. And to do so with absolutely no facts is criminal, I believe. I'm not a lawyer, but it'd be interesting to say if that is not completely illegal. And they use as their prime source this website that comes out has no track record. Nobody knows who these people are, calling itself Prop or not. Now, that prop or not smells like I can't prove it, but at least I'm telling you I can't prove it. I'm not claiming it. What I'm saying now, I'm not claiming it to be factual. It's a hunch. I can't prove it. That's all it is, but at least I'm admitting it. It's a vast difference between that and the Washington Post acting as if it was factual. I'm just saying that based on what I've seen, prop or not just smells and reeks like one of these super liberal activist websites or groups, the kind that George Soros finances and promotes. Now, I'm not saying George Soros financed or promoted this. It just has that ring of something like a MoveOn.org or Occupy Wall Street or whatever. But that's not conclusive proof. It just has that feel. So, everybody who these websites and the publisher for the Washington Post, Marty Barron, tweets, Russian propaganda effort helped spread fake news during election, says independent researchers. Okay, so who were the researchers? He doesn't know. He just publishes it. Okay, so, and then, according to Greenwald, the individuals and groups that are accused of being Russian propaganda agents, they're publicly calling, they're asking for the FBI to investigate them for espionage. That's pretty serious to have the FBI investigate you for espionage over no facts. That's dirty. Joseph McCarthy, which they are always saying is the ultimate evil, at least he had some facts. These people have no facts. And the agenda is to silence any point of view which doesn't fit with the official point of view that they hold. Now, let's see. I'm going to give you some more information. You need to know this. Jesus Christ said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Don't make the mistake that a lot of evangelical Christians make, where you divide reality and truth into a pizza pie of various slices. And that which is spiritual is one slice, and then what is economic is another slice, what is geopolitical may be another slice. But these evangelical Christians erroneously teach that the only truth that Jesus Christ was talking about was spiritual truth, which is total nonsense, because Jesus Christ is Lord of all of life, not just a slice of life. And although salvation is the most important truth, Jesus Christ wants us to know the truth about all things, because it's only by knowing the truth that we can be set free. And before I move on, I'm looking at this these responses to Gary Greenwald's Intercept article on prop or not, and people are making comments. And then as I scroll down, somebody made a comment from BuzzFeed, and there's a picture of Tila Tequila's. She's an actress, model. Look, I'm not commenting favorably on her lifestyle, and this is not an endorsement of her moral beliefs, or what some would say would be lack of moral beliefs. And, the fact that she's wearing this scanty bikini, that's not the point. There's a more important point here, and that is the person from BuzzFeed says this: Tequila's descent into Nazism is a long time coming. The self-proclaimed alt-right Reich, and it's written Reich is written like Third Reich, Hitler. Alt-right queen has a long history of anti-Semitism and an even longer one of internet trolling. Well, the point is, though, that what caught my attention here is that Tequila, despite, I don't know if those things that are said about her are true or not, I have no idea. But I do remember her name coming up early on when that movie star and stunt driver of the Fast and Furious movies died mysteriously in a high-speed crash on the 5 freeway. And I know the area where he tragically died, and because I drive by that area occasionally. And she said something very interesting. And I thought it was odd that he died there anyway, because he was an expert driver. She said it was a hit from some big Hollywood cult, and she was insinuating some kind of satanic occult cult in Hollywood killed him as part of a sacrifice. Now, just put that in parentheses on the back shelf and think about it. Maybe it'll come up sometime later in what we're talking about. Most likely it will, but just put a footnote by that. Okay, so the purpose of the fake news, again, very simply, is anything that doesn't fit the politically correct agenda of the mainstream media, and the fact that they're totally anti-Trump and pro-Hillary is called fake news. And, of course, fake news has really been created by the Russian, secret police or whatever. Now, this is what you call the big lie. That's the principle they're using. They're creating a lie that is so outrageous that it then becomes believable. And there's a psychological principle to this that you have to understand. And once you understand this psychological principle, you'll be able to protect yourself and others from it being used against you. And you'll be able to understand what you see on TV and in social media, etc., a lot better when you understand one of the primary principles of psychological propaganda or scientific mind control. Now, I got into the study of scientific mind control and propaganda and all those things by accident. It started, as I've shared with you before, when I was in 3rd grade and I read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and George Orwell's 1984, and I had an epiphany. I really got the message of those books, and both of them had to do with futuristic dictatorships that relied heavily on scientific mind control and totalitarianism. And Big Brother, in Orwell's book, controlled the news and information. Big Brother was the government. Big Brother was the media that was constantly spying on you. Now, what was interesting about Orwell's 1984 is that this, according to his projection, this whole thing, this scientific dictatorship, would arise in 1984, and I don't remember when the novel was written. I think it was written in the late 1940s. I think I need to check up on that. Could have been written earlier. But what was interesting is that the very things that he theorized would happen have happened. Now, Huxley, who wrote Brave New World, again about a scientific dictatorship and brainwashing and scientific mind control, he would later go on and call this rule of an elite occult, and he called it a scientific dictatorship that used mind control, drugs, hypnosis, persuasion to rule the masses. And Orwell was saying the same thing. So in Orwell's book, the government, using psychological propaganda techniques, would reprogram the people, the minds of the people, by saying things like freedom is slavery, creating opposites in people's minds so that they would believe it, even though it was absurd. But these novels were based on scientific truths that dictators had already used and what they expected to use. Ironically, Orwell portrayed a dark, utopian, totalitarian future with an all-powerful government in which every citizen in 1984 was always under constant electronic surveillance. And this was way before the widespread usage of television and other technologies. And in Orwell's book, the big brother could spy on you by watching you through your television set. Now think about that for a moment. That fits into the category of predictive programming. That wasn't even, publicly at least, that wasn't even on the drawing table for most people back then. Now, listen closely to what I'm going to say, because it's my expectation and hope and prayer that that the Lord would shine His light into your minds, and that He would illuminate the truth that I'm attempting to present to you, so that you too would have an epiphany and you would really nail it. You would really master this subject, so that you would be set free, and then you would be equipped to help others to be set free. Because I hate to break it to some of you, many of you are brainwashed to one degree or another, as we all are, by the way. But the majority of your friends are brainwashed and in, to varying degrees, a scientifically induced trance state. Now you say, oh, Paul, that's just too heavy for me to handle. Well, the question isn't whether or not it's too heavy for you to handle. The only important question is this: is what I just said to you true or not? And now I put the ball in your court. You got to find out. I've written many books which document this, but in order for you to know the truth, you have to study. You have to get up to speed. You have to read. You have to become knowledgeable. Otherwise, you're just, I'm not speaking of those that are listening to my program, but you're going to be like, if you're not careful, these essentially useless people that are just, they know nothing. And they're scientifically dumbed down. That is not God's plan for your life. Look, don't kid yourself. Jesus Christ said, I am the truth, the life. Jesus Christ said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. God gave you a destiny before the beginning of time. But you cannot be released to fulfill your destiny as long as you are bound up in your mind under various scientific mind control technologies or in a trance state. What I'm trying to tell you, trance state, if you really want to trace it back to its ancient origins, which I do in my books like A Prophecy of the Future of America, the first one, Mass Awakening, my book Standing Down Goliath, The Day the Dollar Died, the new book, A Prophecy of the Future of America 2016-2017, and the brand new DVD finished after the election. And it's vital for you to watch this 3 DVD set. America, What's Going to Happen Next? I go way back and I trace the connection between a trance state and scientific mind control and the technologies that were developed and given to mankind by the fallen angels on Mount Hermon. And then, after the flood of Noah, the super civilization of ancient Babylon and the Tower of Babel, which was a technological stargate like CERN, where they understood the fallen angel technologies of scientific mind control, trance states, and so on and so forth. That's why they have to be passed from empire to empire through secret societies. So if you trace this all the way back in time and bring it up to where we are now, this is a very deep subject. But if you understand it, you will be set free. So why this outrageous lie of, this outrageous lie that the Russians are part of it? Well, the reason for that is that it is easier. Experts in propaganda and mind control have understood for centuries that it is easier to get people to be brainwashed and believe the big lie than it is to indoctrinate people with smaller lies. And Adolf Hitler, the head of the Nazi Party, which was an occult party, and Adolf Hitler himself, who was deeply involved in the occult, and occultic scientific mind control, called this the big lie. And I explain it in detail in my book, Mass Awakening, which you must read, forward by Douglas Hagman, and first book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, and the other books also. But these two are essential for for getting this information. Now, the big lie, according to Adolf Hitler, was based on this principle, and Joseph Goebbels, his propaganda minister. It was based on the psychological principle that it is easier to brainwash or indoctrinate people into believing a big lie than a small lie. And the rationale for this, as I explain in detail in Mass Awakening and the first book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, was this. They understood that for the average middle-class person, especially in Germany, these people in their own personal lives, the middle class in Germany, would lie. But it would always be about relatively small liars. Not small liars, relatively small lies. Like, cheating on a grocery bill or whatever, not telling the truth or stealing some small thing. Any number of behaviors, okay? And they would feel very guilty about it. And they would be afraid of being caught, of committing any of these small transgressions and then lying to cover it up, okay? And so universally, this is the way it works for the middle class and the working class. They commit small crimes or transgressions, if you will, and they lie to cover it up, and they're very psychologically disturbed about it. But what they operate in a realm of relatively small and minor law-breaking and transgressions. So because they themselves only tell lies in relatively small areas, they find it impossible. They think, well, it's no problem that the politicians and the political establishment and the government would also do the same things that they do. Okay, they can get that. But since they themselves don't tell massive lies, they assume, it's a psychological principle, that the government and politicians would not tell gigantic lies. They would really be guilty of smaller lies, okay? Breaking a campaign promise or whatever. So that's the psychological principle that Goebbels, the propaganda minister of Adolf Hitler, understood and practiced, and Adolf Hitler understood this. And that's why they would tell the big lie. And that's how come they got away with the Holocaust, where 8 million people were killed. Because when the rumors of the Holocaust began to emerge in Germany, people would rumor and say, they're killing hundreds of thousands of Jews and others in these gas chambers, or burning them alive, or shooting them, or whatever. The reaction was nobody. And they weren't even telling the full number. Nobody believed it because it sounded too big, too outrageous. How could this possibly be? This could not possibly be real, because the scale of the transgression or the sin, the scale of the lie, the scale of the law-breaking was so astronomical, it was so big that the middle class and working class could not possibly ever bring themselves to believe that this big atrocity could actually ever have been done or was going on all around them. And that is one of the primary reasons psychologically why that despite the fact that by the time the whole thing was over, the Holocaust killed about 8 million people. But all the way up until that time, nobody could believe it. And believe me, there were rumors everywhere. But nobody believed the rumors. It was considered crazy talk. It was like saying, the Martians have landed. So Goebbels and Hitler and people in communist Russia and China and propaganda experts in the United States, they fully understand that this is a psychological principle that still works in the consciousness of every human being. And therefore, they understand that it's easier to brainwash people into accepting the big lie than it is small lies, which is the reverse of what the average person thinks. The average person would think, falsely, that, it would be much easier to tell small lies. People would believe that, but people won't believe big lies, when in fact the opposite is true. This is Paul McGuire, and this is the Paul McGuire Report. By the way, this scientific study of lying, propaganda, scientific mind control, brainwashing, the use of drugs to brainwash, MKUltra, the use of sleep deprivation, the use of repetition, hypnosis, certain words. You have to understand that the subject of brainwashing, indoctrination, persuasion, advertising, controlling the masses is a very, very well-studied, sophisticated science where experts over centuries have studied and learned the complexities of the human mind. Everything from behavioral modification, where the Russian scientist would ring a little bell, and that would be a signal for the dog to urinate, and other little cues like that, reward and punishment cues, programming of people. I mean, it's really a vast science, but it's a science that is hidden. There was a movie that was released relatively recently. I forgot what it was called, but it was related to a scientific experiment at Stanford University, where he took ordinary college students and showed them how quickly they could be turned into the most sadistic monsters if just a few psychological inputs were put into position. So it's something this you need to know about this, and it goes into things like cybernetics, where cybernetics is the study of computer programming and how the human mind can be programmed like a computer. And you can learn about it and self-educate yourself about it in my books, A Prophecy of the Future of America and Mass Awakening, where I get into far, far more detail. And Standing on Goliath, The Day the Dollar Died, and the brand new book, A Prophecy of the Future of America 2016-2017, which talks about what's happening now. And then, absolutely, you must get the brand new DVD, 3 DVD series, America, What's Happening Next, because it deals with this stuff. And what you're doing is you're educating yourself. You can get all this at paulmcguire.us. McGuire's MCGUIRE, paulmcguire.us. And by visiting paulmcguire.us, you can get access to the bundle packages on this stuff, free articles, archives of the radio program, the Paul McGuire Report, free DVDs, all kinds of free stuff. And you simply go to paulmcguire.us. You can send a link of this program, the Paul McGuire Report, anywhere you choose. Visit the archives of the programs, listen to previous programs, and then also you can send these programs to your friends. We have a whole list of social media apps at paulmcguire.us, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, RSS, Blueberry, SoundCloud, and so many others, and you can listen to this or send it to friends and use any technology you want to listen to it. But you've got to come up to speed, really, on scientific mind control, because you have to understand that scientific mind control goes far beyond science. Ultimately, listen carefully, ultimately its root is an occult supernatural power that goes back to Mount Hermon and to ancient Babylon. And we explain that also in the book The Babylon Code, which I co-wrote with Troy Anderson, a Pulitzer Prize nominated author. You know, let's take the word assassin. In ancient times, assassins were hired to kill people, usually a lot of times for political reasons. But the assassin was programmed through sorcery and put into an occult trance state. And the assassins would often use the psychedelic drug hashish. And there's a derivative word between hashish and assassin. And so this was really an early form of MK Ultra, which was the occult scientific mind control that the Nazi satanic mind control scientists use when they use the psychedelic drug LSD and occult scientific programming to create Manchurian candidates and other things. Now, taking what we do, I just gave you a brief cruise through scientific mind control, but taking that principle of the big lie, the people behind this propaganda, which is saying that the Russians are behind all these websites, and they have absolutely no proof. The Washington Post is promoting this. We learn, and others, we learn that the reason they're choosing this outrageous lie rather than a smaller lie is because it's easier for the Washington Post and the secret financing behind Prop or Not, whatever organizations, whatever billionaires, whatever radical liberal groups are secretly funding this. They know because they hire. And I've spent an intense amount of research, which is also in these books. Each book contains more and more truth. It's not a repetition, more and more truth about this. And when studying these radical groups, and again, I'm not saying Soros is doing this particular thing, but he has been involved in others. These groups hire the most powerful brainwashing scientists in advertising, in mind control, in subliminal mind control. And that's why they get people virally through the internet. They call it an emotional contagion, to spread emotions of hostility or to demonstrate or to believe, that the Russians have taken over the alternative media, et cetera, et cetera. And I've read the biographies of the scientists and the ad experts they've hired, like companies like Adbusters, which is headquartered in a remote area of Canada. And you read the psychological profile and disciplines that the man who heads this organization, and you realize he's a sophisticated operator. And then he hires people that are called, quote, in-depth psychologists that know how to program the human mind. See, they also use the principles of, which I go into again in the books, but you got to study it. Edward Bernays, who's often called the father of modern advertising. He was an expert. Edward Bernays was an expert in scientific persuasion. His work goes back to the 1917. Adolf Hitler used his principles because they were very effective. And Edward Bernays said he understood you could brainwash people. And Edward Bernays, when he was working and teaching Madison Avenue and American advertising agencies how to sell products, it was Edward Bernays who was the man that convinced the American female that smoking cigarettes was sexy. So you had several generations of American females who are smoking because all the movie stars were smoking. And that was Edward Bernays. He associated being sexually attractive, desired by men, being beautiful, being elegant, as synonymous with lighting up a cigarette, which shows you can brainwash people to believe anything. You can brainwash people regarding their sexuality. Okay, so this is why, and right now I'm going to do some more shows on this, because as I'm talking to you, I'm having, I don't want to overuse the word epiphany, but I am having an epiphany. I have studied this stuff for 40 plus years, and as crazy as it sounds, I am convinced my research began in third grade or lower with the study of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, George Orwell's 1984, plus the fact that I was reading the biographies of every great scientist, psychologist, psychiatrist, mysticism, etc. Beginning, I guess, around third grade. I was one of these nerds. And this was before the internet, when research was hard to come by. I would go to the local library and rent 30 books a month. And I would read about 30 books a month. Science fiction, but mostly on science and other things, which began to teach me about some of these things. Okay, so the purpose by saying it's the Russians that did it is it's a big lie. It's this gigantic conspiracy. Because, once again, it's easier to sell people on that. Now, I'm going to do more than one show on this. So pay close attention to our shows. I may do them consecutively or every couple of days or whatever, but this is not tapped out yet. Because there's no way that we can have a biblical third grade awakening, that we can have intelligent people with a biblical worldview influencing our society, occupying until Jesus comes, doing business until Jesus comes, unless we do everything we can to communicate from a biblical perspective, from a biblical worldview, what we're up against and how to defeat it. It's also part of spiritual warfare. Remember, deception is a lie. And what we've been talking about is a lie. Satan is the father of lies. So ultimately, this is a form of spiritual warfare. Sorcery is based on these principles. And sorcery is talked about in the book of Revelation. So if we boil it all down, you've really got to understand we're talking about spiritual warfare, but we're talking about it on a far, far higher level than the average Christian whatever deals with it. But that's what it takes to win spiritual warfare, because knowledge is power. Remember, the enemy knows this. Yeah, I'm getting an epiphany and like just a constant sense of the imperative and importance of this. There's a misnomer out there. There's a falsehood that is widely embraced by Christians, even the Christians who are intelligent and do have a biblical worldview. Not all, but many have a blind spot regarding this entire area of scientific mind control and brainwashing and so on and so forth. And I have studied it, like I said, exhaustively. And this was not something I ever wanted to study, by the way. It was not something that I ever desired to study. And it just emerged out of an accumulation of research. Okay, so let's focus in very precisely on a dynamic that is a constant in all this. And again, I'm going to use this word a lot as you listen to the program. Listen carefully. And I don't want to be redundant, but it's kind of my way of signaling to you that, pay close attention. Because I realize that it requires like an intentional, willful act on your part and my part to focus in on some of this stuff, because it's not that it's hard to grasp, it requires concentration, because it's material you may or may not have ever been acquainted with before. Okay, as we're talking about scientific mind control and brainwashing, we have to understand that there is a direct causal relationship between scientific mind control and brainwashing and Satanism, Luciferianism, witchcraft, the occult, and sorcery, and the use of mind-altering drugs. You must understand the connection, because if you separate the connection between the two, you're not going to understand what's going on. In addition to that, there is a dynamic connection between scientific mind control, brainwashing, propaganda, and satanic forces and spirits of deception. You've got to understand that. And if you don't, pay the price. Self-educate yourself. You know why so many Christian churches, to be blunt, are wimpy? Do you know why so many Christian leaders and pastors, not all of them, but a disturbingly high percentage, are wimpy and feminized? Do you know why Christian churches are basically running for fear and hiding in the culture rather than being more than conquerors, as Jesus called us to be? It's because they don't have the knowledge, and because they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the power, and they know that. They know that they're weak, and therefore they're frightened, because weak men and women are frightened men and women. But God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. So if you're truly a man or woman of God, how could you be filled with fear? We have to break this spirit of fear, because God has given us power, love, and a sound mind. But knowledge is power. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. We got to get up to speed. Why? Because those who are serving Lucifer, those who are serving Satan and the occult, they know how to merge technology, mind control, and supernatural forces. They understand that. Okay, so we understand that in ancient Babylon and Mount Hermon, scientific mind control, the supernatural technologies were used. This is often referred to as the Babylonian system, or Mystery Babylon. And my friend and I, Troy Anderson, Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist, wrote the #1 prophecy-selling book in the world right now, The Babylon Code, which deals with this. And my other books deal with this. So it began in ancient Babylon, and the Bible constantly references ancient Babylon. So we have a biblical responsibility and a godly responsibility to understand the nature of this, exposing the hidden works of darkness. Now, there is a relationship between the worship of Lucifer, Satanism, and mind control and programming. The worship of Satan has been happening since before Babylon, through many avenues. When the tribes who possessed the land of Canaan, the Canaanites, they occupied what was supposed to be the land of Israel, but they occupied it. And there were numerous names of these tribes, like the Jebusites, the Kiddites, on and on. A lot of the names of these tribes ended with the ites, Canaanites, Jebusites, Kiddites, Kezites, on and on and on. And many of these tribes had the element of fallen angel DNA among them. So they were the descendants of the Nephilim and the Rephaim. Okay? This was the place where God told Joshua and Caleb to conquer the land, and he specifically ordered them to slaughter the people in the land and their children. This is why Christians are unable to come up with a good answer as to how could a good God allow such a thing, because they don't even know the reason why it happened. God was trying to wipe out the genetics of fallen angels among the human race through interspecies breeding. And so Joshua and Caleb were charged with the command of going in and slaughtering the Canaanites. Now, one of the things that the Canaanites did is they worshipped Satan. And they did it through what was called Baal worship, or Moloch worship, or Asherah worship. And Baal was a idol god that represented Satan. And the Canaanites would sacrifice their children by burning them alive on a statue of Baal or a statue of Moloch, which is also a pagan god that represents Satan. And Moloch is the giant owl at the Bohemian Grove where the world leaders meet. So then we have also the worship of Baal, the worship of Moloch, both which involve burning the children alive, having orgies, getting drunk, chanting satanic rituals at worship centers and temples in ancient Canaan and other places around the world. But essentially, they were worshiping the devil, and then they would worship the goddess, the goddess Asherah, through sexual perversion worship, and orgies, and temple prostitutes, and drug taking, and the other worship of Baal and Moloch involved drug taking. All right, so. And Asherah was like a female form of worshiping Satan. And this continues up into today. The world's elite in the United States and in Europe, not all of them, but some significant percentage, are active Satan worshipers and Lucifer worshipers. We see hints of it all the time. They're influenced by Aleister Crowley, the great Satanist, 666, who taught them certain rituals, especially sex magic, from which the elite participate in sex magic rituals. And part of that, what Aleister Crowley taught, was spirit cooking. And Podesta and others were allegedly, according to these WikiLeaks dumps, allegedly involved in at least the outward form of spirit cooking. We don't know what went on behind the scenes, because this woman who calls herself a high priest of Satanism teaches classes in spirit cooking, but privately they can become rituals, and they paint with human blood, semen, menstrual blood, urine, and that's part of the satanic ritual. And supposedly what can often go along with this is pedophilia. And then, of course, satanic rituals at the higher level involve human sacrifice or child sacrifice. And then you have other people high up in allegedly in both political parties, Republican and Democrats, who are members of secret societies, satanic societies, in Europe and the United States. The reports of the sexual orgies and perversions going on and drug taking among the European elite in secret caves across Europe are satanic. It's Satanism, satanic worship. And in Satanism, going back thousands and thousands of years, the Satanists learned how to program people to become their slaves, sex slaves, other kinds of slaves, through drugs, hypnosis, occult rituals, sleep deprivations, shock rituals, okay? That's where MK Ultra emanated from. Russia was very involved in all this stuff too. In fact, most of the large empires throughout history and in the world today have occult secret societies and are involved in occult secret rituals. And this is what forms the basis for scientific mind control, and what we call, from a scientific perspective, monarch mind control, where you shatter the human personality with drugs, shock, abuse, sleep deprivation. You cause the human mind to be exposed to so much shock that in order to protect itself, the human personality splinters into sub-personalities or different personalities called alters. Now, why would scientific mind control choose to call the personalities that have been created, multiple personalities, altars? Altars has to do with worship. Well, because they're satanic altars. They involve satanic worship. Now, you say, well, this is crazy weird stuff. Well, it may be crazy weird stuff, but if you read your newspaper and you pay attention to what's going on in America, Europe, other nations in the world, among the elite in music and film and politics and government and finance, you see a strange things popping up always. Like Peaches Geldin in Europe. Her father, as some of you know, was this big rock and roll promoter. He was knighted by the Queen of England to be Sir Geldin, and he promoted these giant rock and roll concerts with the biggest stars in rock and roll. And his daughter, Peaches Geldin, was becoming interested in OTO, Order Templis Orientis, which was a satanic cult, and Golden Dawn that Aleister Crowley at one time, the great Satanist, headed up. And supposedly she was getting deep involved in it, and allegedly these groups were involved in all the satanic rituals of sex, perversion, drugs, but also human sacrifice. And then you see a picture of her, and the Aleister Crowley books and the OTO books are all behind her in the picture. And I don't know what happened or why, but mysteriously she died. And the rumor is she died because she became horrified about what was really going on, and she wanted to get out. You have all these strange clubs in England and now in the United States, like the Killing Kittens Club. The Killing Kittens is, I don't mean to be vulgar, and if you're going to be offended, then you need to speed through the tape for the next 4 minutes. But I have to explain it, or it becomes meaningless. Killing Kittens, as I understand it, is a reference to female masturbation, and these Killing Kittens clubs that one of the princesses, the princess who's married to Prince, my mind is slipping, and probably most of you know it. Anyway, she's involved. And she's young and pretty, and her husband, she's involved in this Killing Kittens secret sex club that exists in European nations among the elite, and now in the United States, where they have all this perverse sexuality available. But these things are always co-travelers with Satanism and stuff. Doing research for another book I'm doing. I operate in my research through constant prayer, asking God to reveal to me those things that He wants me to know about and communicate to His people. So I have, I believe, a very powerful supernatural asset in gathering intelligence and information. And that is the Holy Spirit leads me into certain areas, not for the purpose of titillation or just exploring darkness, but to expose the darkness. And I was reading about this, it was on the front cover of the Drudge Report, these dark sexual Thanksgiving type feasts, which center on perverse sexuality and other things. So, and you know, people in Manhattan in expensive areas go to these like alternative Thanksgiving parties, which are based on the celebration or at least the acknowledgement of deviant sexual behavior. And this famous female artist was the creator of these parties, and she used certain language just briefly in one of the articles, which I recognized immediately that this sounded like the spirit cooking thing. Where they paint with the blood and stuff. And as I did more research on her, I found out that this so-called artist was not just an alternative artist or like a artist, producing these sexual parties, etc. I found out that she often paints in her own blood. Well, I said, wow, this is a dead giveaway. She must be involved in spirit cooking. And as it turns out, she was involved in spirit cooking. She was involved in painting paintings with her own blood and other stuff. Turns out that she's a witch, and there's a picture of her with a whole bunch of witches, and she's involved in certain forms of sexuality and witchcraft and Aleister Crowley's sex magic rituals, which would infer she's a Satanist. So this stuff is going on, okay? And a lot of it involves deceit, mind control, and Satanism. Because the brutal fact and reality is that there are people who come from multi-generational families that have been exposed to the occult, Satanism, other satanic type groups, and they employ satanic mind control, which is very similar to scientific mind control, and a lot of dark stuff, including pedophilia, human sacrifice, and other stuff is practiced. Now, we'll get into this more, but I hate to rock your world, and I'm talking to those of you that live in the European Union, New Zealand, Australia, Africa, Asia, all over North America, South America. I hate to rock your world, but there's an entire, very, very large underground movement of Satanists and witches and scientific mind control, etc. So going back now, well, wait, before I go on any further, this is a lot of material. I mean, it's a lot. And there's no way, I'm going to do more shows. But in my books, I have hundreds of pages in these books that talk about what I was just referring to, but going into more detail, more depth, all the way back to Babylon, how it interfaces with Bible prophecy. And you need to, I don't know how to say it. People say, why are you a good debater? Why this, why that? Because I read. Because what I read. And I just don't read trivia. I read. I self-educate. And I pay the price to self-educate. But you know what? I'm far happier than the average person who's walking around in a daze. I'll tell you right that. And the Lord has blessed me. Not that everybody's called into the same kind of ministry, but the Lord has blessed me. Okay, so I break this stuff down. I break the origins of it. It's far wider and pervasive than you think. It's like a giant labyrinth. And if you read and study my books, and then hopefully after you've read and studied them, give them to somebody who won't just stick it up on a shelf or use it, to prop up something. My books will really empower people. And I'm telling you, the burden of my heart is that people who are ministering to young people, like youth pastors, etc., and pastors, or whatever, lay people who have prayer groups, would educate their friends. That's my burden. Because I read what they're teaching, and it's like the spiritual equivalent of Trivial Pursuits. It's the devil laughs. He's delighted they're studying what they're studying, because it's so harmless and so powerless that the devil and his demons are having a party every time these people gather and read and study something, a book or a guide that is so impotent spiritually that it lacks any convicting power of the Holy Spirit. The devil and his demons rejoice. And then everybody scratches their heads and wonder why people are not being converted. People are getting converted by my books all over the world, by the way. And my books have intense titles and intense covers. But guess what? The non-saved have an insatiable desire to read them. And the backslidden have a desire to read them. So, you judge a tree by its fruit. I had this guy, as I told you, who came up to me when I was speaking at Chuck Missler's conference, and he just said, hey, I want to introduce myself. You're Paul McGuire. I just want to tell you a story. And to make a longer story brief, he simply said, He was raised in a Christian home. Something happened. He backslid. He rejected all of it. He walked away from the Lord for like 7 years. His mother tried everything to get him back to the Lord. And then she was praying, and the Lord led his mother to get a copy of one of my books, The Day the Dollar Died. Under the nudging of the Lord, she gave her rebellious son a copy of my book, The Day the Dollar Died. And he told me I couldn't put it down. He said, I finished it in 3 days. I just read it for hours each day. And he said, by the time I finished that book, I fell to my knees and I repented of the Lord for turning from him, for getting involved in this sinful lifestyle. And I rededicated my life to the Lord completely because of your book. The Holy Spirit spoke to me and convicted me. And he said, I just wanted you to know that the Lord used your book, The Day the Dollar Died, to rescue me. He said, now I'm just about ready to graduate from a 4-year degree in a Christian college, and I'm dedicated my life to serving Jesus Christ. And the turning point was when I read your book. And that's such an honor to hear that. And I'm saying that simply to say the books hit home. They aren't cute little tidy religious books that nobody reads, okay, and don't grip people. They'll shake people, okay, and that's the point of them. So anyway, we've got to get this message out and explain this because it's happening in the world all around us. With this fake news is just part of it. So before I go any further, if you go to paulmcguire.us, we have bundle prices on these books. If you order soon, we can easily get it out to you if you're in the United States before Christmas by simply going to paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us, and McGuire's MCGUIRE. And books like The First, A Prophecy of the Future of America, Mass Awakening, The Day the Dollar Died, Standing Down Goliath, A Prophecy of the Future of America, 2016, 2017, and you will know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And it's a gripping reading. It'll grab you, and you won't be able to let it go. And I want to read something Doug Hagman wrote in the foreword. I didn't even know he wrote this in the foreword until yesterday. I've written so many articles, which we've given away free, by the way. Thousands of pages of articles. And somehow I ended up somewhere where I read this statement about Mass Awakening, which Douglas Hagman wrote the foreword to, and I saw this statement. Well, anyway, I'll find it later. But the point is, Doug Hagman gave this incredible review, and I didn't know it was from him when I accidentally bumped into the words that he wrote because it didn't have his name on it. The reason it's important is Doug is an investigative researcher in journalism, and the books have helped him piece together the dots, connect the dots, and that's what people want. They want somebody to help them connect the dots. That's reliable. And no, probably shouldn't even answer it, but no, I don't work for Russia. I'm not a Russian agent. That's so ridiculous. Okay, so in Prophecy of America 2016-2017, I talk about what's happening now, what's going on now, because we are in a huge battle at this very second. We're in a massive battle to think that the Washington Post is launching this campaign using the propaganda technique of the big lie developed by Adolf Hitler to convince people that many of these big websites are from Russian agents using Russian propaganda, or at the very least, they're unknowingly printing Russian propaganda. And that's pure you-know-what, because I've read a number of these websites many times, okay, because I do a lot of research. And the people who run these websites, I can't talk about every single one of them, but a lot of them. I've read their websites. They're too intelligent. They don't believe in Russian propaganda, first of all. They're too intelligent for that. This is kind of like an Orwellian attack. It's mind control. It's Big Brother. And, as individuals, and I'm serious about this, you need to denounce this kind of stuff publicly in an articulate and polite way. You need to denounce it, because this is an attack on your religious liberties and freedom of the press and freedom of speech. And if a major media organization working in connection with government or anything else can start classifying people's free speech just because they disagree with it, and then tell the big lie that it's being done by Russian agents and promoters of Russian propaganda, we've now entered the brave new world of Huxley and George Orwell. This is mind control. This is Big Brother censoring. It's a direct assault. This entire fabrication of fake news and, it's and Russian propaganda and Russian agents. It's an attack on free speech. It's an attack on freedom of religion. It's an attack on freedom of the press. And it will bring in America a totalitarian state which will attack viciously Christians, the Christian religion, and anything somebody with a Judeo-Christian worldview writes or produces or puts on Facebook or whatever will be censored or under attack, because it goes against the politically correct world socialist type propaganda. And that's very, very dangerous. What if this is allowed to succeed, it literally means the end of free speech, the end of freedom of religion, and the end of freedom of the press. And yet the Washington Post is fine with that. You will not be able to communicate biblical truths. And all these pastors out there who enjoy the benefits of having websites and Facebook sites and Twitter and media, because we have freedom of religion, will find that their freedoms will be taken away too, and they won't be able to say anything. And they think, oh, no, it can't happen here. But that's what the Jews said. It can happen here. And your right to share your faith in Christ, or your right to stand up for pro-life positions or whatever, will be taken away. That's what these guns are aimed at, you. To take away the cornerstone rights of our Christian forefathers who gave us a nation where we're guaranteed freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press. It's all under attack here, because you can make up this giant lie, big lie Hitler claim that, the Russians are behind it all. They experimented on this kind of propaganda at Princeton University. I talk about this in detail in the first book, A Prophecy of the Future of America. It was called the Princeton Radio Propaganda Study. And it involved Orson Welles, at that time a very famous Hollywood actor. And it was called, it wasn't an accident. People think, it happened by accident. No, it was deliberately conducted as a propaganda experiment out of the Princeton University Radio Propaganda Project. And one of the heads of CBS, and funded by the Rockefeller brothers, where they had Orson Welles do this dramatic radio theater live across the radio across the United States, where he acted as if he was a journalist reporting the fact that the Martians, invaders from Mars, had come down from Mars to the Earth, and that they were taking over various towns in the United States. Now, the whole thing was fiction, based on H.G. Wells' book, Invaders from Mars. The whole thing was fiction, but huge numbers of Americans didn't pay attention to that. And it was a strategic experiment in propaganda, and millions of Americans went crazy. They left their homes. People were having panic attacks, grabbing guns, because they thought the Russians had descended in flying saucers and had invaded America. Now, that was done deliberately by high-level people in our nation and very wealthy people to experiment on the power of radio propaganda and utilizing a big lie technique. See, they didn't tell a little lie. They didn't say, like, there's a rapist on the loose. No, they said the Martians have landed. The Martians have landed. And I described the entire thing in my book and books. And that's the principle, by the way. The same principles developed in the Princeton University radio propaganda experiment with War of the Worlds and Invaders from Mars and Orson Welles. That same principle is what is being used in the fake news propaganda thing and the promotion of the propaganda lie that the Russians are behind all these news stories. It's the same principle. And then when you go down to like a microcosm of it, well, let me just read you a little bit. I talk a lot about this. Never intended to, but it's such a normal part of our world, and it ties into Bible prophecy. It ties into the beast system. It ties into the mentality of the false prophet, the Antichrist, spiritual deception, the great apostasy. See, they all connect. Now, okay. First of all, the Apostle Paul warns us that in the last days there will be a great apostasy or falling away in the so-called Bible-believing church. That is happening now. It's a spiritual delusion, and it's happening now. The great apostasy begins when people who call themselves Christians actually choose to worship the Antichrist as God in order to receive the mark of the beast and participate in a new global electronic economic system. Then the purpose of this scientific propaganda, and by the way, brainwashing, subliminal messages are all over movies like The Hunger Games, Mockingjay. The themes of those movies are really the opposite of what they appear to be. And even more so in the movies, the Divergent movie series and the movie Allegiant. You notice in Allegiant there's a big wall separating the minorities from a genetically pure white race. You see all kinds of propaganda embedded in those movies. And that's why you need to be up to speed about it. You need to understand that they are totally restructuring society. Now, they're also doing it in the educational system. I'm going to read you a quote from a researcher there at Cajo. And she said something very interesting, and you need to pay attention to it. Aldous Huxley was well aware of those plans, and she's referring to a total restructuring and transformation of our society into a world totalitarian government. After all, his brother Julian Huxley became the first Secretary General of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. In Brave New World, he told us that a profusion of new suggestions would transform beliefs and attitudes, till at last the child's mind is these suggestions, and the sum of the suggestions is the child's mind, and not the child's mind only, the adult's mind too, all his life long. The mind that judges and desires and decides made up of these suggestions, but all these suggestions are our suggestions, suggestions from the state. And that's a quote from Julian Huxley, the founder of UNESCO, and he's explaining the purpose of UNESCO as the global governing body over education. Julian Huxley is saying that the purpose of UNESCO in overseeing all education on planet Earth, and that's going on now, is to implant in the mind of both children and adults a constant series of what he calls suggestions. But they're not really suggestions, they're commands, they're programming, and they're suggestions planted into the consciousness of adults and young people by the state, capital S. And that's the mind war game that we are seeing played out here with this statement of fake news and the Russians' conspiracy to make it happen. And this is what we're dealing with. The danger is this has infiltrated the Christian family. It has infiltrated the minds of Christian youth and just youth in general, and it has infiltrated the minds of the media. The media is a propaganda instrument. And once again, we have to understand that the media, listen carefully, the media, through things like the Tavistock Institute and other mind control organizations, are at war with Judeo-Christian or biblical beliefs. They're at war with Christianity, Christian values, Christian morals, Christian ideas. They are at war with them. And part of that war involves the occult globalist elite taking total control of the minds and hearts of men and women through social media, through the internet, through everything, and their power and their dominance has been threatened recently because of the recent election. Their power and control and dominance has been threatened by the existence of alternative media, which has been challenging them, which has been exposing their lies. And so they are fighting back very, very aggressively by telling these outrageous lies that this is all being conducted by some Russian intelligence conspiracy, and this is all Russian propaganda that these alternative news sites like Drudge Report is promoting. Now, it's not a joke. You can't laugh. I know, I was laughing because it's so absurd, but it's not a joke because their end game, listen to me, their end game is to make it illegal to arrest you, to imprison you. Their end game is to arrest, imprison, shut down, destroy, potentially kill anybody that threatens their total control and domination of the hearts and minds of mankind through the occult, globalist controlled media through 6 corporations. This is very dark and sinister. And don't kid yourself. Everything that you read, when you do the research like I've done, and it's in my books, you will see that the Christian church is #1 on the target. So we're fighting for our freedoms and liberties. For those of you who think, oh, gee, a particular president got elected, now I can go back to sleep. Well, you're AWOL once again, because you can't go back to sleep. God has blessed us with an incredible miracle, but now we got to go the distance, and I'm serious about that. We have to go the distance because we can't be selfish. Being selfish means we just look after our own selves and lie low and pretend it's going to go away. It's not going to go away. It's going to increase. If you're faithful to the Lord Jesus Christ, then you must be faithful to his word. If you're faithful to the Lord Jesus Christ, then you must be faithful in preserving the constitutional liberties in America, which allow us the freedom to preach the gospel in all the world. You must be faithful to protecting the religious freedoms contained in freedom of religion and freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Because you can't claim to be a faithful Christian who loves Jesus as Lord and then hide or escape or go into denial about the central spiritual battle, which is over the right to communicate the truth of God's word through preaching, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press. If you're absent from that spiritual battle, that's the most important battle. Because what is the battle that's going on right now? It's a battle for the hearts and minds of mankind between Lucifer and between God. And we're approaching the time of the last days soul harvest. That's what it's all about. And the last days soul harvest will be hindered if nobody can preach the gospel. Christ already told us that the harvest is white. Is white for harvest, but the laborers are few. Now, if you add to that laws which shut down any possibility of sending out laborers to the harvest or preaching the gospel, then we can't fulfill go into all the world and preach the gospel. We can't fulfill make disciples of all nations. And the only way we can do that is to obey the third part of that Great Commission, which says, go occupy until I come. That means stand your ground in whatever nation I've put you in. And occupy means it's your job as a peaceful, loving, law-abiding, spiritual soldier in Jesus Christ. It's your job to occupy, which means to maintain and preserve your religious liberties and stop things like the lies of saying that everybody who disagrees with the mainstream media is a Russian propagandist agent. You've got to do something about that. Even if it's just twittering and tweeting and using Facebook and fine. If you want to go to one of these churches where the pastor's hiding out, I'm not going to say anything to you. I mean, I've said what I needed to say to you before. Just remember, you're accountable before Jesus at the judgment seat of Christ for whatever you decided to do. As for me and my household, we decided a long time ago we're going to serve the Lord. So my question to you is, again, we have won a great spiritual victory, a great spiritual battle. But winning a great spiritual battle does not mean the spiritual war is over. We need to do everything we can while the doors are still open. They may be closed 2 or 3 years from now. How do you know there won't be a coup in the United States of America based on this nonsense? You think a coup is not possible? Well, you're in dreamland. We need to pray like we've never prayed before. So I'm asking for your help personally. I don't know how much longer I can continue to do what I'm doing because freedom of religion is under attack. I need you to stand with me like it really matters, because it does really matter. I need you to fight the good fight of faith, because we're supposed to occupy until he comes. I need you to partner with me in high-level spiritual, peaceful, law-abiding spiritual warfare, fasting and praying and repentance for me, my family, and this ministry on a regular basis. Without your powerful intercessory prayers, I can accomplish nothing. I need a prayer army behind me on a monthly basis. And I need you to partner with me in giving gifts financially and donations financially as the Lord tells you to do. Don't set limits in your mind. Well, I'll do this or this because that sounds good to me. No. Don't be irresponsible or foolish. I'm not asking you to be irresponsible or foolish, but I'm asking you to go before the Lord and listen to what he tells you to do. And whatever he tells you to do, do it, because he's going to bless you if you do it. And that goes for every other area of life. Again, if you're renewing your mind with the Word, the thoughts that you think are going to be in the mind of Christ. But I need people to stand with me. We're ready to launch the Paul McGuire Report on television. Now think about this for a moment. I was watching all this nonsense the other night with the fake news, the Russians and stuff. And I went to bed and I said to my wife, honey, I said, I outlined for her something I wanted to put in a documentary type film for winning souls to Christ and teaching Bible prophecy. And I gave her a little outline, and I kind of did the verbal special effects and stuff about exposing what propaganda is. And I said, if I do it this way, and I kind of like performed my own segment of the film, I said, you'll break that trance state, you'll get people's attention, and then we can reach the youth for Jesus. I was so on fire about telling her that, because I know I'm a former filmmaker. I know it will work. I know it will grab the attention of the youth. It'll save youth. I know it. And I could see it so clearly in my mind. And I slammed my fist, not in anger, but in kind of like somewhat frustration against the mattress. And I said, I've got to be able to do this. I've got to free up my time to do this. I have to get the funds to do this. I have got to do this. I said, honey, because I know that this will work. That's what I think about morning, noon, and night. I'm not up late at night thinking about how I could buy a bigger house or a fancier car. More power to you if you want to do that. That's not what I'm about. You just heard what I'm about. Okay? But I've got to have the money to do that. And I'm frugal. I could do that. I could do the segment that I outlined for pennies on the dollar compared to Hollywood, because I used to be feature film producer. I know how they waste money. But that's what we have to do to reach people with the gospel of Jesus Christ and go into all the world and preach the gospel. So I need people to step up to the plate, people who are serious about Jesus and the gospel, and give, donate, like it really matters, because guess what? It does really matter. How many other media ministries are communicating this kind of content to you? There are some. There are some great ministries out there. And they deserve your prayer, and if God leads you, your support. But they're few. And I believe a lot of the stuff we're doing is breaking ground. It's setting the trend for others. And that's fine. That's fine. Because I don't care who gets the credit, really. But, that doesn't mean anything to me, because it won't matter in heaven. The only person that really deserves to get the credit is Jesus. So would you join with me and become a regular monthly partner with your donations or contributions at paulmcguire.us, and together we can turn the tide of the spiritual battle and fulfill this great commission of the Lord. Visit paulmcguire.us, that's paulmcguire.us, and remember, together, I want to launch this TV thing, man. It's important because many people are visual. I have plans for really taking social media to the next level, but I've got to have your partnership. I really do. I got people who want to jump on board, but this is something that we got to do together. No one man can do it by himself. So go to paulmcguire.us and stand with me, take advantage of all of our resources, and spread the news, spread these links. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire, and as we approach the new year, let's offer up a good report to the Lord. We are well able to take the land. That way we'll please the Lord. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us.